This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Us for that conversation is an economist with IC Group. He's Churchill Ogutu, and he joins us this morning. Churchill, good morning.
Good morning to you.
How are you doing?
I'm fine.
Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
You know, we ask you to come and tell us Kenya's getting some more money, how it spent the money that it had before, and how it essentially will spend this money coming in, and what this whole samurai bond is about. Thank you for coming this morning.
Thanks.
Before we do go to Japan, we went into Africa, Dennis, and he wants to share today's proverb and ask you to interpret that for us.
Yeah, we went into Seychelles, smallest country in the continent, but the same country has one of the largest seeds in the world.
Seeds.
Okay. Seeds, yes.
Okay.
That seed is called a cocoa dima palm. I think I've dima palm. And they also have black parrot, Aglanta aldabra tortoises, and is also one of UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the country. It is powered mostly by tourism because it's an island, and tourism does well in that country. But let's go to the proverb that we get from Seychelles.
Yeah.
It's silly to criticize others when the same flaws exist in both. It's silly to criticize others when the same flaws exist in both. How would you interpret that?
Oh, different ways of looking at it. I think top of my mind is the biblical phrase of you can't remove a speck in your brother's eye yet you have a log in your eye. The other one is before you start looking at even the faults of others, at least ensure that you don't have those faults because, and this is something that we tend to see our own faults in others, and we sort of magnify those faults in others, yet we have the same faults. So I don't know whether I've answered you satisfactory or that suffices.
Your interpretation can never be wrong. That is your interpretation, and perfectly indeed. You cannot look at other people's problems if you have your own. Perhaps start by solving your own.
Indeed.
Yes.
Or at least talk about it. And let's try and see how we can solve them together.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you for coming. Obviously, we know that TICAD happened last week, and we know that it is a rolling development that happens coming out of Japan. Many would say that Tokyo tries using TICAD to cement its position around the world in terms of geopolitics and to kind of try to make sure that the world feels its presence. We also know that the position that Tokyo takes is more of a pacifist position. You rarely find that Japan is the one who is triggering or being the catalyst towards world conflict. But you'll find that they often then to take on a pacifist role to try and sort things out. Their development agenda also is very, very broad. We see very many development projects from Japan in Africa, but with TICAD and the establishment of TICAD, we then saw that Japan was taking a more robust approach or outlook towards development with, a lot of the money that they have. Now, there's a big idea about a bond. It's the samurai bond that the conversation was had around in Tokyo last week. And now we hear that Kenya is likely to get some money out of the samurai bond, and this bond will be in yen, and it is supposed to go towards development agenda. That's the top layer of it. We'd like to get to know exactly what all of this means, and then what kind of burden Kenya then would take over from this new one.
Oh, thanks. When you mentioned that Japan nowadays is pacifist, it doesn't take any of the world bickerings that have been ongoing over the couple of years. But I'm reminded of events that ended in 8 years ago, World War II. And I mean, Japan was the epicenter of that. But so, I mean, it can be phrased that since over the last 8 years, Japan has now taken a more pacifist role based on the lessons that they learned from World War II. But having said that, we have the announcement that came off last week around this potential samurai financing. Just to clarify that it is not a bond, it's a samurai loan. The difference is, if it's a bond, it's it's normally accessed through the Japanese markets. Samurai bond, for this instance, or even any bond whatsoever, is normally within the markets. But here we have Samurai loan financing. It's like a credit line.
Okay.
So the limit is around 25 billion Japanese yen, which is equivalent to 22 billion Kenya shillings. And then it's pegged on a number of projects, so to speak, that will go towards from this financing. So we have close to 13 billion, which is around the National Automotive Plan. Another 5 billion or thereabout towards reducing the electricity transmission costs, and then the balance of 4 billion is now for budget support. So that's pretty much the breakdown of the 22 billion. And it's what was announced last week was basically an statement of intent. We haven't seen the financing actually being passed on to Kenya, because we saw it was the Prime Cabinet Secretary and now the chairperson of Nippon Export and Investment Assurance sort of signing this statement of intent. We didn't see the Cabinet Secretary of National Treasury now as the counterparty. So that tells us that it's something that is being planned. That over there, I don't know when it will be finalized, but we are expecting some 22 billion Kenya shillings equivalent from Japan.
Okay. There's three things that you mentioned. The National Automotive Plan. What is that?
I think from the context of what's playing out is things to do with electric vehicles. So I haven't looked at that particular policy or the plan, but I think it's something to do with what's the green energy agenda, this whole electric vehicle agenda, which I think we may be able to get some technical developments or sorts from Japanese, and that's where it's being married. The fact that now this Samurai credit line facility is now tied to this particular project, and this goes to some of the financing that we've seen from Japanese rather. It tends to be project specific. If you look at some of the roads like the Ngong Road project, if you look at even some of the geothermal projects that we've done, that have been done by Kenya with assistance with Japanese, so they tend to be project specific, and it's not even surprising that this national automotive plan has been tied towards this financing.
Yeah, so here we talk about Kenya's intention to then again get a new credit line facility from Japan, which previously it has been, you talk about Ngong Road, that I think was a grant, if I'm not wrong. You talk about the Kipevu in geothermal, that was a loan that Kenya actually even finished paying for it. Now it's still under development. But you look at this new credit line facility that Kenya is getting into 22 billion shillings. And there is the question of, aren't we biting a little bit too much due to the 11.5 trillion shillings debt that Kenya already finds itself in? How would you look at it in terms of Kenya being able to service the loans and debt that you're already in?
Well, a number of things, Dennis, that is coming out. One is, if you look at the quantum, 11.5 trillion, the stock of the current debt vis-a-vis this 22 billion is a drop in the ocean. And if you sort of do like a comparison, on a weekly basis, the government comes to issue treasury bills, 24 billion equivalent. So it's like these monies that you're getting from this Samurai financing is equivalent to 1 week's treasury bills auction. So that's just to put it in perspective. The other thing is the fact that being a credit line, you can see that it's kind of linked to either some trade or investment perspective. And also the underlying, you find that there's Nippon Export and Investment Assurance. So there's an insurance element around this facility. So you can see that from Japanese perspective, they are somewhat covered. They have covered the risk in the event that these projects that they want to finance, either they go belly up, they do not materialize as has been projected. So there's a form of some insurance that the Japanese have covered themselves. And this is unlike typical bond. Say if it was a samurai bond, is pretty much going to the market and then raising whatever amount, say 25 billion yen or whatever amount that they could have raised. But in that instance, pretty much there's not much insurance. If there is little as compared to what we are seeing here. So that's another difference that we are seeing. So it might not, we haven't seen even the, as I mentioned earlier, this is just a statement of intent. We haven't seen even the kind of interest that will be there. But if you compare the interest that typically are attendant with Japanese yen loans, they are way lower than say dollar-denominated loans, even if it's commercial, because of the interest rates in Japan is way lower than, say, in the US. So, but looking at that, probably the interest rate might be lower, but now Japan is covered and also is kind of project financed.
Is it necessary?
Is it necessary?
Yes.
Good question. Well,
You'd say it's a weak sell of the treasury bills and bonds.
it seems to me that one, the government authorities, they want to diversify themselves from because this is a foreign currency loan debt at the end of it. So, and largely we've seen that it's pretty much skewed towards dollar-denominated debt. So even if they are getting a minimal amount in a different currency, is a way of them diversifying. We don't know the whole ball game. Probably the start is now starting with a small quantum of 25 billion Japanese yen and then gradually build up. Probably we might get into some big ticket samurai bonds. You've seen a number of African countries taking up samurai bonds in significant amounts, but probably that's the end game, that they just start small, and then as even I'm seeing even the papers today talking about that Japan wants to have increased dalliance within the African continent. So probably that's just the first step, and then probably, who knows, in the next couple of years it will be a big supplier of Japanese or samurai loan or samurai bonds. Who knows?
Seems like Africa is a darling of many jurisdictions. Talk about China, its footsteps in the continent. Talk about the US. Talk about any foreign government that you think about, and everyone is looking the African way. And one would argue that even as we get into these agreements, talk about the credit facility, talk about the debt that the bond now that Kenya might want to get into in the future. There is much more that the country would get from Japan, say, exchange program in terms of technology. Just the other day, the German government rolled out its automotive industry in the country, and that is in it. And Japan is one of the biggest automotive manufacturers in the world. So why are we looking as if what Kenya or Africa is doing with the countries from those sides is pretty much on credit, debt, and not on investments in, say, Kenya or in African countries?
I think underpinning that is the non-alignment policy that African countries have had ever since they had independence, this 60, 70 years ago, that they are not aligned to a particular say jurisdiction, be it European powers or look at the West, the US, or even the East. So there's that alignment that whoever comes on board, they are happy to have some form of engagement with them. But having said that, the kind of financing that you've seen, and it's something that keeps on gradually. Over the first years of independence used to be some development assistance. Yes, leave us alone the World Banks and largely it was World Bank and the IMF development financing. But also then we could see the Japanese coming in on board to at least ensure that there's some form of some development assistance. And over the years, you've seen now China has come on board, and also the likes of the Gulf Council countries, the UAEs, are starting to place a pivotal point on the continent. And it's not just the debt, but also some form of investment. If you look at how they're putting themselves strategically on the continent. So that's something that is beneficial to Africa. not just Kenya, Africa as a whole, this non-alignment that they can play, okay, not play, but they can be able to bring on board all these world powers in their development agenda. But at times you find that the kind of engagement is lopsided. If you look at the trade statistics, is basically Africa exporting the primary products, whereas we are importing the finished products. How can it be, to your question, that at least Africa can also be sort of midwifed so that it can gradually become industrialized part of the world, or just to be somewhere in between, even if it doesn't get into the services where some of these countries have really advanced in the services, if you think about the Asian countries, but at least ensure that the industries within the continent are far advanced so that it doesn't become lopsided, whereby we just send our primary products into these countries and then we re-export them back as finished goods. So that's an area that we need to have with the engagements with all these powers. Yeah.
Obviously, looking at the laws of economy, that there's certain things that you can bring in to boost an economy, manufacturing being one of them. And I'm looking at these three areas that this loan is supposed to fulfill. This first one where we talk about, again, I'm going back to the National Automotive, whatchamacallit?
Yeah.
Yes, the National Automotive Plan. And that is to bring in technology when it comes to, vehicles and their movement. It's taken Kenya a pretty minute to get the BTL buses on the roads, right? And even then, I think there's just still a few. And economics dictates, and of course, you're the expert, so you can let us know, that does economics not dictate that there's certain infrastructure that you must have in place in order to put in another, in order to then start to go towards productivity, and then productivity now be able to reach a surplus, then to meet a demand, or to even that what feeds or what gives you information as to what the demand is what you've already been able to do. And so that leads to the question where I was asking about, is it necessary at the moment? Not necessary that, is there a need for it, but compared to where the country is in terms of developing its framework where all these other things can stack up. That's one. The second one we're looking at is transmission lines. KPLC has told us time without number that some of the reasons why we see power rationing in different parts of the country is that the route of transmission lines is basically taking you round about the whole country when you're trying to get from Kitale to Muhoroni, for example, and you have to go so far. So what are they trying to do? To set up the infrastructure that allows this to take place. Fantastic thing. It's absolutely great that people then who have experienced rationing or no power at all can then finally start to get it. And one of the reasons they say they cannot do that is because of resources. I see now this as a direct answer to that. The question is, will it happen? And then can you say such a loan, take a loan for development by all means, but is it viable if it actually is not going to be done? Will it actually be done? And then finally, to meet budget constraints. That's when sometimes, for example, you've not sent capitation to schools, for example, you can meet it here or there. Or if SHA is going to have a little bit of a problem whereby we don't have enough money to pay the 73 billion that's owed to, private hospitals. That's what we talk about when budget shortfalls here and there cannot be met. These are great things for any developing economy. But is it necessary if they're not going to be done?
Wow, quite a lot, mouthful of questions. But anyway, so in no particular order, looking at the automotive industry, to your question around the infrastructure, indeed, it cannot be gainsaid that we have to have the adequate infrastructure first and foremost before we start thinking about ramping up this particular automotive plan or policy. So that speaks also to this whole question we've been asking, is it really necessary? Because do we really need to have this kind of engagement with the Japanese so as to be able to roll out the automotive plan? It's not necessary. And also we've seen other players coming into this particular sector, be it electric vehicle, be it also this nascent automotive sector. There are private sector players coming in, and it doesn't mean that if we get this 13 billion from the Japanese through this Japanese credit line, that now we cannot be able to ramp up the automotive sector. No, we also have the private sector players also in place. How can they also be onboarded, or how can they be incentivized enough, or how will it be competitive in the event that we have the players already and yet we have this kind of engagement through this Japanese yen financing? So infrastructure and also the role of the current players within the system, and how will it be? So there's more that comes into that within the automotive plan. But to your question also, I mean, infrastructure is first foremost that needs to be sorted out. Getting into the other issue around the transmission line, yes, I'll bring a bit some key questions that, okay, 4 billion that needs to be allocated towards reducing the transmission costs. But is it really adequate, looking at even the whole transmission infrastructure that you have? Will it rather be, even from the budgetary support that we have, and also to Dennis' questions, that we can also have some technical collaboration, some passage of knowledge from the Japanese who are quite advanced in this kind of transmission, engage electricity transmission, how they can now be able to come to some form of partnerships with them, at least to be able to ensure that we are reducing the transmission costs even locally amidst all these constraints that we normally have. Because 4 billion might not even do much or assuage the concerns that are within in this particular sector. So probably some form of partnerships could have been done, or I don't know whether it will be appendant once we get this financing, that yes, they're giving us the money, but also on the other side, there's some form of technical assistance to ensure that it's more sustainable, so that we don't keep on rushing to them once our transmission lines have really gone low. So that's another thing that probably or hopefully we shall see once this financing comes in. And to the budget support, because the balance from this financing, we're looking at 5 billion, and there's been some constraints we've seen, even in the implementation of the current financing financial year. Speaking of now the SHA, the capitation to schools, that there's been some shortfalls. And 5 billion, I mean, if you look at the whole budget's envelope, it's something that they can be able to reallocate from one budget line to another. So it doesn't mean that you need to get to this extent to borrow 5 billion for the budget support. So I think back to what I said, that all this seems to be a first step to probably something much more meaningful engagement with the Japanese.
With the Japanese.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break at this point, then come back, because really, from what I'm hearing you say, and I think you've mentioned it twice now, they say 3 times the charm. Let's see what will happen after the break, because it seems as though if Kenya were to then just put a little bit more elbow grease in this money that we're going to borrow, Kenya could actually get it for itself without borrowing it. But we'll let you say it for the 3rd time yourself when we come back from this break. Chacha Logutu is an economist at IC Group, and he's here with us this morning, and we're looking at the Samurai loan that's coming in to the effect of about 22.5 billion shillings that Kenya's taking for certain things. The automotive plan, transmission lines for that support, and then also budget support where there is a lack. We'll come back and talk about more when we come back from this. It's now 24 minutes to 10. Don't go away.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
In Kenya's drylands, life depends on rain, but the rains are no longer predictable.
Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Sorry? Chachil Ogutu. You know, because I know a Collins Ogutu. I think that's why in my head it's just Churchill, I'm very sorry.
I'm sorry to call it so good to true.
Sorry to him because he's not the one having to deal with crunching all these numbers. Indeed, Churchill Ogutu is here with us this morning. That just rolled off my tongue. As we have this conversation, and the amount of money, the effort that is made to the effort far outweighs the energy. The effort and the energy far outweighs the amount of money that is actually coming. Right, 22 billion shillings. When you do that equivalent, or you do that equation, the energy and the effort far outweighs the amount that's coming in. And that is why the radar then goes up. Should we be asking the question, why attend the conference, get this samurai loan, essentially, because the money will become, it's been agreed upon. This is not a suggestion anymore. The principals have had a conversation. This money will actually come to Kenya. But it seems like a really minuscule amount, and I know we've gotten to the point where by billions is a small amount of money, but it seems like a rather small amount for that effort to be made, and then the questions arising as to whether the money will actually go to these projects that we are talking about. And the timing also is not favorable, or rather is very favorable to the speculation, Churchill, because there are too many things happening at the same time. And somebody would ask, why literally fly halfway across the world, have this conversation about these three, what would be mundane things? I mean, we're not very sure about where this budget support is going to go to for 22 billion shillings. And in terms of where would it go?
Well, just to put it into context, this month we had, this is the domestic market, we had reopening of an infrastructure bond. And infrastructure bond, they typically fly off the shelf because government was looking at 90 billion, and then they got bids over 300 billion. In that instance, they accepted 90 billion. And then last week, they accepted 90 billion, so they rejected the rest. And then last week, they came with what you call a tap sale. So tap sale is basically like, in simple terms, is a saucer. You've eaten your ugali and then you get a saucer. So that's a tap sale in layman's term. So they were seeking 50 billion, and then they got close to 179 billion.
So what you're saying is it was oversubscribed?
It was massively oversubscribed, yeah, because they're just looking at like 50 billion, and it was over 2 days. Like, opened on Tuesday last week. By Thursday, we close it. First, if you get the 50 billion, or by Thursday, whichever comes first, they close it at 179 billion the following day. So that tells us that the market is quite what you call liquid. It has the cash available that you can extend to the government. So that is the context that we need to look at it, that rather than, as Ndua said, fly halfway across the globe to look at 22 billion, why can you also pitch it to the local market and say, okay, guys, want to do this automotive stuff, we want to do this transmission line, and then you package it. And also, remember that infrastructure bond is ideally meant to go to infrastructure projects. And the kind of things you're talking about, things to do with automotive industry, or even the infrastructure towards that, or even the transmission line, that speaks to infrastructure projects. But what you have is, even in the instance I've spoken about, there are no underlying projects that say, okay, we got the 90 billion is going to this infrastructure board projects. The tap sale, you got another 179 billion is going to this ABCD infrastructural projects. So that could have been an easier way of doing that in terms of rather than going to get 22 billion. So 22 billion, yes, probably they could have done it differently. But I think that, and also, and this is my view, last week was just a statement of intent. And this is on the back of, early last year, we had a memorandum of understanding that was between the National Treasury and also the this particular agency, Nippon Export and Investment Agency. So from last year to last week, over 18 months thereabout, we have a statement of intent. So probably before now we start looking at actualizing, or even the disbursement of the loan, It may take another time, probably who knows how much time it will be before now we see the actual finalizing or the extension of the credit. The other thing also is that Kenya got the 25 billion Japanese yen, and also there were a host of other countries in that forum. Probably they got their own fair share of 25 billion yen, I don't know. And the thing is, it's one of these, if you look at it from the Middle East and the competition, because last week was Tokyo Investment Corporation on Africa Development. Last year was Forum on China Africa Corporation, which also had its equivalent $50 billion dollar extension on the African continent over 3 years. And I can draw some similarities between last year's China FOCAC and also last week's Japanese one, whereby most of this financing is towards credit line. So it speaks to trade finance, for instance. So at the onset of it or at the back of it is like there's this underlying trade that needs to happen before no financing comes in. Either trade or either investment that needs to happen in. So even Africa or Kenya needs to find a way of positioning itself so that not to be the recipient, but also to be at par. I remember there's a conversation that our president made that China and Kenya are the ones dictating things. So probably even Africa needs to also be on the sitting table. It's a big hope, but
New world order.
Right.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
as we just have this discussion here, you look at what the local investors can offer to the market. You know, we talk about massive oversubscription of these bonds and whatnot. And one would argue from the other side that the government is trying to get away from local debt so that business in the country can move, so that the locals are able to access affordable credit. I don't know. You are the economist to let us know. But how would you now have that conversation in the sense that the government is going outside to make it easier for Kenyans themselves to access credit? Or is it just the government that has an appetite for debt from international coffers, or just debt generally?
Yeah, I think the argument can be made that the moving away from the domestic financing to external financing is a way to reduce what you call the crowding out effect in the domestic market, at least to ensure that credit extended to the real sector. And if you look at the statistics as of July, that's last month, the amount of credit that was extended to the private sector, if you compare July this year vis-a-vis July last year, it was 3.3%. It's come from, it was negative late last year, early this year. So that's, it was a point whereby the economy still struggling, and also the lending rates were really quite high. Now we've seen from August last year all the way to this year, like 7 successive cuts on the central bank rate, which is now the base lending rate. So it's in the hope that was from 13% to 9.5%. So in the hope that now as the benchmark rate has been reduced, so even banks cannot be able to move in tandem. So at least the focus is that even this, as the best lending rate is being cut, also it's the banks react accordingly. Banks might say, oh, you see, I have these expensive deposits because they pick deposits from people, but then they locked in some of these deposits at high rates that were there. Case in point, T-bills right now is at 8%, thereabout. 9 months ago, it was 15%, 16%. So you can imagine the kind of, if T-bills were 15%, 16%, and if you probably want to put money into fixed deposit, you could probably have gotten it at those kind of levels, but now it has come down. So that's the maths that probably the banks have been having in terms of not adjusting their rates accordingly. But now the focus is that as the central bank rate is a signaling rate to the bank so that they can also reduce. But you've seen that is slowly starting to happen, because as at some point it was negative, now it's 3.3%, but it's still way low. It needs to be at least 10% so that the banks can now be able to, at least if there's a choice between government, lending to the government and lending to Dennis, they may not run away from lending to Dennis because government is giving this kind of a bond. So that's the emphasis that they are trying to do. But as they pivot away to the external, there are a number of things that they are also looking at. Either should they borrow on commercial terms? Because as they are borrowing locally, it is on commercial terms. They borrow at the rate that they get from the market. But either they can look at borrowing on concessional terms. We are not sure what kind of financing terms that is attendant with this samurai bond financing. But my guess is that because of the insurance, the insurance element with it, probably is a bit lower. But ideally, they would want now to start borrowing on concessional terms in the international markets to reduce the cost of borrowing, even to reduce the cost of servicing the debt. So I think that's pretty much the end game.
So it is a commercial loan?
It appears to me that it is a commercial loan, but because of the guarantee element to it, it might be slightly lower.
The interest rates would be lower.
The interest rate will be lower.
Okay, so what is the guarantee? Because there, in terms of collateral or whatever the case may be, is there a collateral that is put up against it?
No collateral in the sense that there's an insurance element. The entity, Nippon Export and Insurance Agency, typically gives this kind of insurance. So I understand that there could be some lenders on the Japanese side who will now extend the credit line to Kenya. And then there's the insurance that is provided by Nexi, the statement of intent that was signed last week. So there's that insurance element that is there as far as from the details that you've seen so far. So it looks like it's a commercial loan, yes, but with an insurance element to it.
So let's look at this debt that we keep getting from outside, yeah? So we go TICAD, bilateral agreements, the usually side events. There's a deal that was signed here. There's another deal that was signed here. But as we sit in this studio today, we say 22 billion can easily be raised locally. So why go for it? You look at our exports, say, even through AGOA, right? We get cheaper rates when we're sending to the US, but what exactly are we sending? We're sending our foods, you know? We're sending our avocados, we're sending our skuma wiki and whatnot. But if we're sending avocado, we are then again importing avocado oil. Why are we not sitting and looking at how, as a country, perhaps we could partner with the United States government and have a manufacturing plant here so that they import finished product? We talk about base titanium at the coast in Kwale County. All that dirt and raw material was taken outside the country. All that we've been left with are holes and boulders there, nothing really to say from the titanium base. Are we looking at a point where as a country would sit and have these discussions such that those that want to get raw material from us invest here and buy the finished product? Are we looking at such conversations perhaps in the future?
I think that's a step in the right direction. I'm not sure the extent that these discussions are being held in light of even what's happening within. Let me pick example of the US. AGOA is coming to an end. Next month, there were like two sets of legislations that ideally should have unlocked extending AGOA. One of them in the House of Representatives by 2037 and the other bill in the Senate by 2041. But we haven't seen much under this current Trump regime. We saw the kickoff of the higher bilateral tariffs that kicked sometime early this month. Kenya 10%. That's the minimum. Other countries much higher. So I believe that in the extent of negotiations is typically what is expected to happen between America and the other countries, that this kind of negotiations will come in. That speaks even to some of the non-tariff barriers, how these industries cannot be able to be set up in the Kenyan market. That speaks to investments, because that one was one of the main sticky points. If you look at the foreign trade barrier report that came from the US, amongst all these countries that was slapped with a higher tariff, they were speaking even to some of the barriers to entry by some of the companies. So if those are addressed in the context of the bilateral negotiations that we expect with the US, for instance, because that's what has been quite at play right now. Probably could see some of the investments being ramped up. And to your question, rather than now importing some of the fresh, some of the primary produce, we cannot be able to export the finished products.